Hello, my name is Mayor Ed Pawlowski of the great city of Allentown. I'm here today to tell you that the city of Allentown has a 500-pound gorilla on its back that will sink the city financially if not soon dealt with. And that is the city's rising police and fire pension obligation. Now, this has been the focus of my administration attention since I first took office. It is the single most important issue confronting us because it will affect everyone if left unaddressed. Due to decisions made in the past by prior administrations, Allentown's pension obligation landscape is totally lopsided. Now, there's been much said recently about decisions to use concession lease of the city's water and sewer utilities to address Allentown's dangerously unfunded pension liability. There's not been much said about the consequences of not doing it. It's time Allentown residents, taxpayers, and business owners get the facts from the person in City Hall who is confronted by our checkbook and balance sheet every day when I come into work. So let me provide you with a brief overview of what we as a city will be facing, what we have done to address the issues, and what we are planning in the future to correct and solve this problem. I've entitled my presentation, Rebuilding Foundations, because when you look at the actual foundations, the financial foundations of the city, they're cracking. And they're cracking for a number of different reasons, and they need to be rebuilt. And so, as I get into this, I'd like to talk to you about repairing those broken foundations. And when you look at the foundations that are broken, there's several reasons for this. First off, we are addressing what I call Allentown's legacy costs. Those are costs that we have occurred through the past. One, because of long-term labor contracts, crippling pension costs due to the early retirement of both fire and police. In fact, when I came into office, we lost a third of my entire police force due to early retirement. Individuals that retired between 30 and 40 years of age, and gaining anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 for the rest of their life. This year, I lost over half of my fire department to an early retirement. We also had increasing health care costs, and then on top of all these issues, we also had the recession. Now, the recession started back in 2008, and it had a massive decrease in revenues. In fact, I often say that cities are the first to feel the brunt of the recession, and we're the last to come out of it. Because if you think of it, all our revenue is recession-related, whether it's business taxes, or earned income tax, or business licenses, or fees, or even sales tax on properties. In fact, we have a 1% sales tax, deed transfer tax is what it's called, that the city gets on a yearly basis. Back in 2006 and 2007, we were getting about $2.8 million a year from that one line item in the budget, that one tax. Because of the recession, we are down to $700,000 a year. In the last 4 years, in that one line item alone, the city has lost over $8 million of revenue. Also, on top of all that, we had the stock market crash, which significantly reduced our returns on our investments, but also dramatically increased the pension liability and exacerbated the problem that we had before us. So these foundations are broken, and what we've been trying to do over the course of the last several years is sort of rebuild the city's fiscal base. Now, we've done it on a number of different fronts. What I've tried to do is use your money, your taxpayer money, as wisely as possible, increasing revenue where I could, without raising property taxes, because as I'll show you further on in this presentation, we have the highest property tax rate in the entire region, the entire Lehigh Valley. We're at a significant competitive disadvantage to our surrounding municipalities. So we've looked for ways to increase revenue without increasing property taxes, and we've done it. For the last 7 years, we have not increased your taxes on property taxes. We've also looked for ways to cut costs on almost every area of city government. So starting back in 2006 when I came into office, we came in with a significant deficit, over $4 million. We immediately went back to City Council and restructured the budget, rebalancing the budget, cutting out $2.2 million in expenses. We beat that projection that year. We came in $5 million under our anticipated expenditures. We also implemented what's called the Emergency Services Tax, or the Local Services Tax, which is now called, which was a tax on $52 for both residents and non-residents who worked in the city. Now, before I came into office, they had put this proposal to the voters almost 3 times, and 3 times it had failed. In fact, the last time was about 6 months before I came into office in 2006. It had failed miserably, 3-1. Now, we brought this back to the voters, and we brought it back because it was critical. We needed extra revenue to come into the city to pay for some of the costs that we saw were rising on a continuous level. Brought it back to the voters, explained to people why it was important, and 6 months later, it passed, and it passed overwhelmingly by 3-1. Now, that's important because it brings us in $3.6 million in increased revenue on a yearly basis. I also tackled the pension costs. As you know, as I said in my opening remarks, we had 1/3 of the entire police force retire. And this was significant because it dramatically increased our pension costs. I had individuals that were 30, 40 years of age retiring with 20-year pensions because of an early buyback provision, because of a provision that allowed them to have 13 years on the force and get a 20-year pension. They had 100% of their overtime that was calculated into their pension. They could use any 30-day period that they wanted as the base of their pension. The bottom line is our costs dramatically increased. Our pension costs went up astronomically. And so I was the first mayor ever in the state of Pennsylvania to challenge and say, we can't afford these costs. They're unsustainable. We actually took the police union to court. I still drive very slowly to this day as a result of it. But we were able to, and successful. We came to a settlement that was able to get us $1 million a year back from people who had already left the system and retired. The first time ever in the state of Pennsylvania. Up to $20 million over the next 20 years. But folks, as you will see as I get in this presentation, that is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of funds that we need to address this ever-growing problem. So in 2007, moving on, we also addressed a debt spike. Not only did my predecessors leave us with a ever-ballooning and increasing pension cost, we had a massive debt spike. All our debt was ballooned, and it all came due in 1 year. In fact, our cost of our debt went up over $8 million in just 1 year in 2007. So we addressed the issue. We went after it aggressively. We looked for ways to cut costs. We beat our budget in 2007. We came in $3 million under our projected expenditures, and we also restructured our entire debt. We were able to flatten it out over a 20-year period, and we pulled out about $19 million, which allowed us to increase our overall general fund, our unrestricted cash reserves that have helped us to make it through this very difficult recession, as well as has helped us pay for these ever-increasing pension costs, which I will highlight in just a second. In 2008, as the recession started to hit, I had a general directive to cut costs, to not fill positions, to keep any vacancies that we have open and eliminate any vacancies that have occurred to retirees. As a result, we have the lowest staffing level in the city that we've had in over 30 years. We are down over 125 positions from when I first came in 2006. Now, as you all know, our population has increased. We were the fastest growing city in the state of Pennsylvania. In fact, I joke with my staff, if it wasn't Lower Macungie actually beat us by 15 folks. And I keep beating up on my staff and said, you couldn't register 15 more folks for the census. If they did, we would have been the fastest growing municipality, not just the fastest growing city, but the fastest growing municipality in the entire state of Pennsylvania. We grew by 11%. Now, we have more people to serve, we have more needs to serve, and we have less folks to serve them. So our staff is doing a lot more with a lot less. We also refinanced some bonds. We saved about $680,000. We successfully crafted a casino revenue sharing agreement. As you know, we were in line for a casino with Bethlehem. We were competing with Bethlehem for a casino. They got it, we did not. But what we did do was something that was historic in the state of Pennsylvania. We actually crafted a revenue sharing agreement with the city of Bethlehem, where we get 20% of the revenues received for perpetuity. We wrote that into the final gaming law. And that brings us in several $million a year. We also beat our budget projections that year as well in 2008 by about $3.8 million. And we successfully, for the first time, I had a chance to restructure the contract and get rid of some of the pension benefits that led to this ever-increasing, ever-growing pension liability in the police contract, and we did. We restructured the contract. All the provisions that led to this ever-increasing costs, like having any 30-day period that you want as a base to your pension, using 100% of your overtime into the calculation, being able to buy back 4 years, all that is gone. It's all back to a basic pension, a basic municipal pension where you have to work 20 years, you have to be 55 or older, you have to be able to average out over a 3-year period. And so we were able to get rid of all the benefits, all those crazy provisions that led to this astronomical and growing and ever-increasing pension liability, which I'll talk about in a second, was eliminated. In 2009, we continued to cut. In fact, we continued to beat our budget projections. As the recession started to hit, even in mid-year, we put together a fiscal stability team, a citizens team of accountants and experts to help us to even cut more out of our budget. And we did. We cut another $1.1 million out of our general fund and about $3.8 million out of our enterprise funds. And then we beat that projection by $2.5 million. We increased our rental licensing fees that year to cover the cost of our inspectors, the true cost of our inspectors, which brought in another $1.3 million. We further reduced our workforce levels. We saw the first tranche of our casino revenue fees come in from the last quarter of 2008, came out to about $780,000. And then we worked out a water sales agreement with the Lehigh County Authority. If you've seen the Coca-Cola plant and the other bottling facilities along Route 178, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's many plants that have developed there, and they needed water. We had water. For those of you who've been to Coca-Cola Park and have gone through the parking lot, you'll see that old big facility that sits in front of that park, which was an old Aguirre facility, which was Lucent, which was Western Electric. What they used to do there was actually make microchips, and they used lots of water. In fact, 20% of our water capacity was used in that one facility. So when they closed that operation and moved it to Singapore, we now had 20% additional water capacity. And that's in just one plant. So we have lots of water. So we worked out an agreement with the Lehigh County Authority to sell them over 9 million gallons a day, which comes out to about $1.5 million extra a year for the next 20 years. And so for those of you who have been on the west end of our city, gone through our parks and see them putting in a new pipe, that's what that pipe is for. Also, for those of you who are drinking Nestle Pure Water, look on the back of the label. You'll see it says Allentown Municipal Water Source. So we were able to take that asset, sell it, and bring in another $1.5 million into the water fund each year. 2010, we enacted an increase in our EIT. We increased it by 0.35% for all those folks who lived in and outside the city and worked in the city of Allentown. Now, that was under an old law, state law called Act 205. We did that and to basically help pay for these ever-increasing rising pension costs. That fund can only be used to pay for increases in pension costs. And so we increased it by 0.35%. We also saw the first full year of our casino revenues, which came out to about $2.9 million. We asked the unions to work with us and to cut our costs. Now, in 2009, when you were seeing layoffs across the board by corporations both near and far, we had an increase in our labor force cost of 9%. I said, folks, we can't handle that anymore to my employees. So we restructured their contract. We cut that down to 1.5% over the next 5 years, which is basically the rate of growth for the city of Allentown. And we did something incredibly unique. We actually transferred all of our SEIU employees, and those are employees in parks and public works and our streets department, all the folks who help make the city run. We transferred them into a national SEIU healthcare plan, the first city ever. Saved us over $6 million. They actually capped our healthcare costs at 4% a year for the next several years. I also talked to the police, and the police helped us out as well. They had 4% increases in their contract. They gave that up for several years. They took 0%. They gave back some sick days, some holidays, and they even cut their overtime for court costs in half. That saved us over $6 million. We saw a temporary reduction in our MMO. Now, MMO is very important because it stands for minimal municipal obligation, and I will mention that a lot during the course of this presentation. It is the minimal payment that we have to pay for our pensions. It's like the minimal payment on a credit card. It doesn't actually pay for any of our debt. It's just the minimal payment that we have to pay to stay afloat. We were able to decrease that cost by 25% because there was a state law passed that allowed us to do that, to basically help cities to recoup the losses that they saw by the collapse of the stock market back in 2008. Only a short-term fix, doesn't really solve the problem, only pushes it off into the future. We also sold some properties. We had some cell towers. We don't need to be in the cell tower business, nor do we know where that technology is going in the next 10 years. But that brought us in another $1.1 million into our general fund. 2011, we saw the first four quarters of the EIT come in. The new EIT increase under Act 205. We recaptured some EIT escrow. It came out to about $400,000. We refinanced bonds, which saved us about $525,000. And we saw an increase in PMRS. Now, PMRS stands for Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System. Our MMO was reduced last year. Now, that is a statewide system. It was reduced by $2.5 million. Now, I bring that up, that it's a statewide system, because myself and my other mayoral colleagues across the Commonwealth have been lobbying for years that the fire and police pension fund should be in a statewide plan. We should aggregate these dollars together and obviously get a better return on investment. And I'll give you an example. This year, next year, 2013, my minimal payment for pensions for PMRS, which incorporates about 510 of my employees, that's pretty much all the employees outside of fire and police, is $1.6 million. $1.6 million for 510 employees. For the fire and police pension funds, which are the obligation, direct obligation under state law of the city, $16.9 million is our minimal obligation. 1.9 for 510 employees. I'm sorry, 1.6 for 510 employees, 16.9 for 310. Something is dramatically wrong with this picture. Now, as I said, we've been lobbying for a statewide plan for many years. The problem is this, and I think this figure is astronomically telling of what's happening here in the state of Pennsylvania. There are 6,700 municipal pension plans in the continental United States. 2,500 of them are in Pennsylvania. 6,700 nationwide, 2,500 in Pennsylvania. Every little borough and township and city has their own pension plan. So every time we try to come and consolidate, we have a lot of opposition on Capitol Hill in Harrisburg against this particular plan. But as you could see, it would actually, if we ran it like the PMRS plan, we'd have it significantly less overall pension liability. 2012, we refinanced some bonds. We saved about $310,000. And then we also, for the first time after 7 years, I had the ability to affect the contract for the fire department. We again eliminated all the crazy benefits that led to the early retirements and got back to basic municipal third-class city code pensions. Now, I say all this to say that we have done everything. We have cut costs in almost every single level. We look for ways to raise revenue on almost every single level. And I have a picture here of a boat sinking. Because no matter how much we bail out the boat, no matter how much new revenue we bring in, no matter how much cost we cut, the boat keeps sinking. No matter how much we bail it out, water keeps coming in. Now, folks, it's like renovating a house. We have renovated every single room in the house. We've taken care of every room. But the foundation is still cracking. And it's cracking because of the massive pension liability that we have been saddled with from past contractual relationships that the city has entered into. Now, on top of all that, the problem has only been exacerbated by the recession. Over the course of the last several years, we have had a dramatic shortfall in revenue. Though we have cut costs on every level on the expenditure side, our revenue declined dramatically. In fact, we have lost a significant amount of revenue. Now, our revenue shortfalls are getting better. The deficits in revenue are getting smaller. The economy is improving, but the damage is done. We have basically eaten away all of our unrestricted cash reserves. We are down to $1.9 million. We have about a year left, and then we will be running in the red. We will be in the same position as Harrisburg and Scranton. Now, we can't continue to go that route. I will not allow us to go off the fiscal precipice. We have to address this plan and the situation before it gets too late. And so, on top of all this, on top of what's happened with the recession, we have this unfunded pension liability. Now, currently our liability sits at about $130 million of unfunded pension liability. That's as of January 1, 2011. Before, we had 50 firefighters retire. We are now up to about $150 million in unfunded pension liability. Now, the reason that's important, because the higher the pension liability, the unfunded pension liability, the higher the MMO, that minimal payment. The lower the unfunded pension liability, the lower the minimal payment. So we have to address that unfunded pension liability if we're ever going to find relief and stabilize our finances going forward. We are also legally required under state law to pay these obligations. I have heard some folks say, well, just don't pay the pensions. We can't do that, folks. It is impossible. There is no way under state law that we have, under state or federal law for that matter, the ability to just not pay the pensions. These are contractual obligations that the city has. And they were done prior to my coming in. I didn't create this problem. You didn't create this problem. But we have a problem that needs to be addressed, and we can't just walk away from it. On top of all that, the fact that we have this high unfunded pension liability and these rising MMO costs, these minimal payments, we also have an increasing debt that we have carried because of pension bonds that were floated in the past. Back in the 1990s, they thought the way to solve this problem was to take out and borrow $40 million of pension bonds. Now, the theory was we're going to borrow money at 6%, and we're going to get an 8% return, which is going to pay for the principal and interest on these bonds. Raise your hand out there if you have gotten an 8% return on your investments. My thought is there's probably not many people raising their hand, if any, because that has not been the experience in the marketplace. So not only do we have this ever-increasing, rising minimal obligation because of this growing and ballooning unfunded pension liability, but we also have $2.4 million a year that we have to pay on top of all that to basically pay for these pension bonds, which still exist. There's about $36.9 million of pension bonds still on our books. So the bottom line is we need a dramatic increase in revenue to fill this pension gap. And I think this chart says it all. When I came into office, our pension cost was $6.5 million. This year, even with a 25% reduction in the MMO, it is $15.5 million. If you look at the next column, I think it's even more dramatic. Over the course of the last 7 years, not only have we balanced budgets, not only have we tried to use your taxpayer dollars as wisely as possible and not raise property taxes to address this issue, kept our tax level flat, we've absorbed an additional $35.4 million in pension costs into the budget. Now, with $35.4 million, I could have paved every street in the city of Allentown. But it's all been going just to pay that minimal payment for the pension costs. This is a scenario that is unsustainable. Unsustainable going into the future. In fact, we projected out, and just to pay the minimal payment, with the increases that I projected, over the course of the next several years, we will need to raise taxes between 35 and 40% over 6 mills just to pay the minimal payment. To actually address the unfunded liability, you are looking at a tax increase of over 100%. Now, that is unsustainable. We have 25% of our population that's at or below the poverty rate. Another 20% are senior citizens on fixed income. There is no way that our population could absorb a tax increase of that magnitude. In fact, if you look at this chart, I think it's very telling and says it all. We are at the highest tax rate at 17.5 mils. That's not even including the school district taxes. 17.5, the highest tax rate in the entire Lehigh Valley. We are at a massive competitive disadvantage to all our surrounding municipalities. South Whitehall, that borders up against us, is 4.9. Salisbury, that borders up against us, is 3.6. Lower Macungie, which borders up against our western border, is at 0% mills. We're at 17.5. We are at a significant disadvantage to attract middle-class homeowners and businesses back into the city. And if we double that tax rate, we will see people, the middle class in particular, leaving the city in droves. We will be left with a population that can't afford to pay this high increase in tax. And so we'll see our default rates go up, thus less revenue coming in, thus only exacerbating this problem. So we need to address this. We need to have a dramatic increase in revenue, and it can't come from property taxes. So just to recap before I give you the solution, if I haven't totally depressed you at this point, the recession has negatively affected Allentown's economic stability. Budget revenue shortfalls have impacted the city over the last several years. Myself and City Council have restrained spending and enhanced revenue wherever applicable. Our recovery is on track. Our budget deficits are shrinking. The economy is rebounding. But one obstacle to full recovery is this huge unfunded pension liability, which forces the city to make significantly increasing annual deposits, our minimal municipal obligation, our MMO, to the city's pension fund each year. And by 2015, that will be over 25% of our entire general fund revenue will just be going to pay the minimal payment on the credit card. And the city's tax base will never be able to meet the challenge. Even if it could, this would equate to a minimum monthly payment on a very high credit card balance and doesn't really even address that huge debt, because that unfunded liability is a debt. It's a $150 million debt that we have as a city. It doesn't even address that, just pays the minimal payment. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we close this pension gap? Well, to use medical terminology, the first thing we need to do is stop the hemorrhaging, which we did. We addressed both the fire and police pensions through the contractual arbitration process. We eliminated all the outrageous benefits that led to this ever-exacerbating and growing pension problem. We got them back to basic municipal pensions. The second thing, to continue to use medical terminology, is we have to now go after the tumor. And that tumor is that unfunded pension liability, that $150 million nut, if you will, that we need to crack. And we've looked at a lot of different options. We looked at raising property taxes, which we've already talked about is undoable. We looked at issuing pension bonds. We looked at leasing or selling out our parking, leasing or selling our golf course, and also leasing the water and sewer utilities. And I'm going to briefly talk about each one of those. We also talked about doing nothing. What if we just ignore the problem? Go into bankruptcy? Folks, we can't, for several reasons. One, under state law, the state has actually passed a law when Harrisburg was basically playing around with going into Chapter 9 bankruptcy, that no municipality in the state of Pennsylvania can go into bankruptcy. Now, I don't know what happens when you run out of money, but technically under state law, we cannot declare bankruptcy. Even if we could, it would be devastating. All you have to do is look at what has happened in Stockton, California. About a month ago, there was an article in the New York Times, you can look it up online, that talked about Stockton, California and the devastating effects that it's had on its economy. No one wants to work there. No one wants to buy a house there. It didn't really solve their pension problem, and it only made their financial woes even greater. Their crime rate has gone up over 50%. The other reason is even if we could go into bankruptcy, which we can't, in a normal bankruptcy, you usually go to a judge. The judge assigns a trustee. I can almost guarantee you that the trustee would be looking at all the options, just like we have here, and would probably come to the same conclusion we have. But we wouldn't have any control over it, of the decision or the process as a city. And then the final thing is, it would be devastating for our city economy. Would you buy a house in a city that's just declared bankruptcy? Would you open a business in a city that's just declared bankruptcy? It is a ludicrous scenario to think that that would help us or help grow our economy in any way, shape, or form. So this option is totally off the table. It is not recommended, and it's not something that would be pursued under my administration. The second thing we looked at is, what about pension bonds? Obviously, you know, interest rates are a lot lower than they were in the 1990s. What if we borrowed $100 million and stuck it into the pension fund? We could do that. As you could see from this chart, the blue line, it would lower the MMO and stabilize it. But by the time you figured out the principal and interest payments, it would bring it back to the same level. You would still need a dramatic increase of anywhere from 60 to 100% tax increase to basically pay for the difference on the principal and interest on the bonds. So all you're doing is exchanging one debt for another debt. You're really not solving the problem. We looked at some of our assets, like the golf course. Obviously, the most expendable asset that we have is the golf course. Now, we looked at first at a lease. We thought, could we do a lease? We did a valuation, came back extremely low. Golf course just doesn't make that much money. Lease came back at about $10 million for a lease concession. We looked at selling the land for development. Provided we got past the deed restrictions that date back 150 years from the Trexler Trust, and the fact that you have almost every lawyer in the valley that lives around that golf course, and the multiplicity of lawsuits that would be leveled against the city, the valuation for the land came back relatively low, only about $40 million. Not enough to dramatically impact that $150 million unfunded pension liability in any significant way. We also looked at the parking authority. How about the park? You know, many cities are leasing or selling their parking authorities. We did a valuation, and it only came back at about $20 million. And the reason being is very simple. Until the new development happens in the downtown, we have very little utilization of the parking decks. One of the reasons that we picked the arena location is because we have 2,800 spaces of parking in and around the arena location downtown. The problem is those 2,800 spaces of parking right now after 5 o'clock are only utilized 2% of the time. On the weekends at any time, they're only utilized 3%. They just don't generate enough money to really make it a valuable asset at this particular period of time. Now, years down the road, potentially. But now, to solve this problem, not a viable option. Even if you put both these options together, neither generates enough net revenue to truly significantly impact that MMO. And then we looked at our final option, the water and sewer. Now, we have a unique asset. We have never sold off our assets. We never transferred them to a countywide entity. We never put these assets into an authority. We have a good asset. We haven't deferred maintenance on our water and sewer plants like many cities have across the country and across the Commonwealth. We have a good, stable base of customers. We're the third largest city in the Commonwealth, and our population is growing. According to the Morning Call that came out with an article a few weeks ago, our population in the next 10 years here in the Lehigh Valley will grow by 210,000 people. So we have a growing base of users. So we hired one of the best consulting firms in the country, AUS. They looked at the system, they valued it, and they came back and they said, your system base price is worth between $130 and $200 million. Now, that obviously got my attention. That's in the range of what we need to not only address this problem, but to pay off our water and sewer debt, which is very low as well, which is only about $30 million. So I asked the consultants. We hired another consulting group out of Chicago, Ketchen Mutual, a law firm that only focuses on lease concessions and sales of assets across the country for major cities. And I said, you know, I really don't want to sell our system. I would like to keep control and retain ownership of our system. Can we do a lease concession like I've seen in many other municipalities across the country? And would it be worth it with some of the restrictions that we're putting on? Would it be a valuable asset? And they said, yes, it would be. They came back and they said it would be. It would actually be a valuable asset that folks would like to bid on. Now, what we're proposing in a lease is not to sell the system. We're not giving up title or control in any way, shape, or form. We would be leasing it out like renting an apartment, except for the fact that we wouldn't be getting those payments on a yearly basis. We'd be getting one upfront payment in the beginning of the lease period, which we can then utilize to basically eliminate our unfunded pension liability, thus reducing our yearly MMO, that charge, dramatically, as I'll show you in the next several charts. So in exchange for this upfront lease payment, the city would secure a proven and experienced utility provider chosen through a very highly competitive and professional process, will assume responsibility for managing, maintaining, and operating the city utilities. The city would be relieved of all capital and operating expenses for the system going forward. And at the end of the the city would take back the utility in good order, condition, and repair to the benefit of our future residents. So if we were able to get this significant upfront lease payment, what we'd be able to do is eliminate our unfunded pension liability. And by doing that, you could see how dramatic that decrease is. Take next year as an example. We would be going from $18 million to $3.5 million in our minimum payment. And it would stabilize at that rate for the next 20 years. $18 million to $3.5 million. Even if we did about 80% of that, let's say we're only able to eliminate 80% of our unfunded pension liability, you could still see it would dramatically reduce our monthly minimal municipal obligation, as well as stabilize it for many, many years to come. If we did do this, we could probably look at having no tax increases for the next 5 to 7 years. If we didn't do this, we're looking at massive tax increases over the next 5 to 7 years, plus increases in water and sewer utilities going forward. So what would this partnership look like as we create this new partnership? Well, first off, what we'd be doing is monetizing the system. We can't, folks have asked me, they said, well, Mayor, why can't we just increase water and sewer rates and use that to fund the pensions? Sounds like a plan, but we can't do that under state law for various reasons. You can't, there's state laws that prohibit municipalities from just astronomically raising water and sewer rates to offset tax increases. We can't actually raise the rates, let's say $500, $600, $700 to just pass that on into the general fund. What we can do, Bud, is monetize the asset that we actually have. And what I mean by monetizing is leasing out the actual infrastructure, the pipes, the treatment plants, while retaining ownership and ability to set operational standards and retain oversight over the many important public concerns related to these utilities. So we're not looking to sell the asset in any way, shape, or form. We're looking to lease the asset, just like we would be renting on an apartment on a year-to-year basis. The terms of the lease would be as follows. We would never transfer the asset. We would never transfer title or control throughout the entire length of the lease term. The city would always maintain control, and this is key, to its current water sources. We would never lease out our springs or our wells or our intakes. And I want that for two reasons. One, I want to be able to control the flow of water, which thus controls the pricing. I also want to be able to control and profit share. If these new companies come in and actually are able to pick up new customers, I want to be able to share in a portion of the profits on those new sales. The lease would be approximately 50 years. And folks say, well, why that long, Mayor? Why would the lease period be that long? And it's very simple. I want this new company, which is probably most likely be a for-profit company, to be able to totally depreciate the asset. I also want them to be able to amortize their cost over a long period of time. Now, if the city owned the water and sewer plant, and I can almost guarantee you, folks, over the course of the next 50 years, there will be need for improvements to both water and sewer. They will have to be improved. There'll be either mandates come down from the EPA or the Department of Environmental Protection asking us to improve these facilities and the performance of these facilities. What I would do as a municipality, if it was under city control, we would basically take a bond out for the longest period of time to obviously keep the cost as low as possible that would be passed on to you, the consumer. I want the new entity, the new leasee, to be able to do the same. I would like them to defease their cost over a long period of time and be able to keep that cost as low as possible. Thus, we have a long-term lease period. We also anticipate that all our current labor agreements will remain in force. No one will lose their job. The way that the contract is set up is that they have to assume our current collective bargaining agreement and our workforce. The city would not be liable for future operating or capital costs. All that would be assumed by the leasee. The city would retire approximately $30 million of water and sewer debt. And the city would revenue share with the leasee on any new water and sewer service agreements. Now, as we get into this lease, the net proceeds would actually go to, the city would reduce the MMO. The city reduces pension and unfunded liability and eliminates the need for exorbitant, unaffordable tax increases. And the good news is, for those of you who work in the city and don't live in the city, because we increased your EIT, the earned income tax, under a law that was specifically designed to help distressed pension plans, since the plan will not be distressed anymore, that Act 205 EIT increase will be eliminated. Everybody will get a tax break. We also want to make sure that we protect our quality and our rates and our service. And so one of the things that we're doing in the lease concession is we're looking at and have developed to date an operation standards manual. We hired an engineering firm. We hired folks that have been involved with the water and sewer system for the last 30 years to work with us on developing a standards manual that will, the new company, the new leasee, will either have to meet or exceed our current operational standards and performance. There will also be in the lease fees and fines. If they don't meet those standards, they will be fined. If they continue not to meet those standards, they can be removed as an operator and replaced with another operator. So the lease enables a sustainable, reliable enforcement approach to protect the city's interest throughout the entire lease process. We would also set up an office of consumer ombudsman. Several key staff that are currently employed with our water and sewer department will head up this office. Their job will be to make sure that that operation standards manual is monitored and enforced, that the current quality that we have is either at or better than what we're currently receiving for the products that the water and sewer plant produces. We will also have rate controls. In the contract itself, we have set rates. We control the rates for the new leasee. The first 3 years, you will not see any rate increase. In fact, over the last 20 years of the city's operation, there has only been one time where you have not seen a rate increase in a 3-year period. And that was under the administration of a gentleman called Ed Pawlowski. We did not raise your rates in 2006, 7, and 8 for a 3-year period. We will see that again under this new lease. We will not raise rates for 3 years, and then after that, it'll be a 2.5% increase with a CPI adjuster for the first 10 years, and then after that, it'll be 1.5% increase with a CPI adjuster after that. Now, what does that all mean? For those of you who have Social Security, you know what the cost of the CPI means. It means that the Consumer Price Index, your increases for Social Security are based on that. Now, many of you have not seen an increase this year in your Social Security because the CPI has been low. Some years it's actually been negative. Some years it adjusts back and forth due to inflation. So some years we will have a rate increase that's fairly low, maybe even lower than 2.5%. Other years it may be higher to adjust for the rate of inflation that's occurring within the overall marketplace of the United States. Now, just to put it in perspective, most people say, well, I don't understand. You know, my rates are going to go up. Folks, your rates are going to go up if we do this or if we don't do this. I can tell you over the last 10 years, your water and sewer rates have gone up over 60%. Over the last 20 years, for those of you who have lived in the city, it's gone up over 196%. In the last 48 years, that's as far back as we can go, your water rates have gone up over 668%. Now, most people don't see it. Some years it's 0, some years it's 3, some years it's 8, one year it was 40, one year it was 20. They were all over the board. But the average is about 5.7% a year on an annual basis. In many ways, this will be lower than the annual rate of increase that we have had over the course of the last 20 years. So again, the lease agreement enables a sustainable, reliable enforcement approach and protects the interests of the city and its residents. So the recommended solution to this problem is to lease the water and sewer system. Make significant deposit into police and fire pension funds, substantially reducing the minimal municipal obligation payments to a manageable level, stabilizing our tax rate and our budget for many years to come. The city revenue shares with the leasing on any new and water sewer agreements, and then at the end of it, we get the whole system back in a state of good repair. Now, for many of you, like myself, I will probably be dead by that point. But at some point in time, they can either bring it back in-house, the city of Allentown, or do it all over again. I think this is a good deal for the city. I think this is the best deal for the city. I think it is the scenario out of the choices that we have, it's the best choice to address this particular problem. Now, what is our next steps? In August, we put out a request for qualifications. Now, I had many at that point say, who would bid on this, Mayor? What companies would bid? Very simple. Most major companies that provide water and sewer service across the United States bid. We had a request for qualification. We wanted to make sure they had the management capacity, the financial capacity, and the quality of service that we would want and require here for our residents of Allentown. We had over 20 companies request an RFQ, 9 submitted applications. After a thorough review process, we limited that from 9 to 7. Those 7 companies are the only ones that can now bid, when we put this RFP out within the next week or so, on the actual concession lease agreement itself. Now, folks actually said to me, why would a company want this? Well, think about it. If you're in the water and sewer business, just like if you're in the utility business, like PPL, you only have several ways to expand your marketplace. You can either build out a whole new system, which is incredibly cost intensive. You could buy a system, or you could lease a system. That is the only way you expand and build out your customer base. This is a great opportunity for a company to build their customer base. We're a large system, a system in good repair, a system with very little debt, and a system with a growing customer base. I believe, as we put out the request for proposals, we will see proposals come back that may even exceed our expectations. If we do that, we may be able to even pay off all our debt as a city. We could become one of the first debt-free cities in the state of Pennsylvania. So council will vote on this as of October 31st. They will be voting to put the request for proposal out so we can get more information, and then hopefully get the proposals back by the end of December and actually vote a final vote to award to a winning contractor the lease agreement. So just to wrap it up. So in summary, to wrap it up, a current pension and unfunded liability will derail Allentown's fiscal recovery and impose unsustainable tax increases on the city residents and its businesses. We have tremendous opportunity on the horizon. We have over $1 billion of new development happening in the city of Allentown, but we will not be able to realize that success unless we fix the structural instability that exists within our pension fund. The public-private sector interest and expertise in managing water and wastewater systems provides immediate financial relief and long-term enhancements to the city through ongoing investments in its water and wastewater systems. This lease agreement will help the city eliminate its unfunded pension liability, substantially reduce its debt, remove the 0.35 earned income tax increase under Act 205, and potentially stabilize our tax rate for years to come. Folks, I wouldn't introduce this plan if I didn't believe it was in the city's best interest to keep Allentown on the road to sustain economic recovery and stability. I realize change of this nature causes great uncertainty and anxiety. But John F. Kennedy said it best: change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The alternatives, however, that will undoubtedly be forced on us will be far worse than the current proposal at hand. If done correctly, this plan has the ability to eliminate our unfunded pension liability, substantially reduce our debt, stabilize our tax rate for years, and have our assets kept in good order, condition, and repair for many decades to come. I hope this provides some insight and some clarity on this important issue. If you would like to view information presented in this video, including the lease agreement itself, visit the city's website at www.allentownpa.gov. That's www.allentownpa.gov. We have challenges, but we also have opportunities. If we address this issue, do it right, this city, our city, your city, has a bright future. Thank you for listening.